Could a carbon atom that was once part of Albert Einstein be in you? All living things need to take in carbon-containing molecules to fuel their activity and build their cells. This is true for busy students and for all organisms. Let's look at how carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle in the Arctic tundra. Carbon atoms from carbon dioxide are incorporated into living things by producers, such as this plant. Carbon dioxide enters a leaf, moves into a cell, and goes into a chloroplast. There, in the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is used to make sugar molecules. The sugars can be used to build larger carbon-containing molecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. In this way, carbon that was in the air is now part of the plant. When a plant is eaten by an herbivore, or primary consumer, carbon in plant tissue enters the primary consumer's digestive system. There, plant molecules are broken down. These small molecules are then used by the primary consumer to make larger molecules for building its own tissues. In this way, some of the carbon that was in a plant becomes carbon in a primary consumer. Similarly, when a primary consumer is eaten by a higher-level consumer, some of the carbon in the primary consumer is incorporated into the higher-level consumer. Carbon-containing molecules in dead plant material, animal feces, and dead organisms are taken up by decomposers, such as fungi and bacteria. Decomposers break down these materials and incorporate some of the carbon atoms into their own bodies. We have now seen how carbon moves from carbon dioxide to producers, to primary consumers, to higher-level consumers, and to decomposers. How does carbon get back to the atmosphere? During cellular respiration, carbon-containing molecules are broken down, and ATP is made. Carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct and returned to the atmosphere by producers, consumers, and decomposers. Overall, this return of carbon dioxide by cellular respiration is closely balanced by its removal from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The global carbon cycle involves living things on land and in rivers, lakes, and oceans. And, by the way, considering the huge number of carbon atoms in each person and how quickly carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle, there is almost certainly a little of Einstein in each of us.
The nitrogen cycle. All proteins and nucleic acids contain nitrogen. An amino acid and a DNA nucleotide are shown here. The cycling of nitrogen is critical to life. Bacteria play a crucial role in recycling nitrogen between the atmosphere, the soil, and living things. Some bacteria live symbiotically in the roots of certain species of plants, supplying their hosts with a direct source of usable nitrogen. The largest group of plants with this mutualistic relationship is the legumes, a family that includes peanuts, soybeans, and alfalfa. Free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria in soil or water convert N2 to ammonia, NH3, which then picks up another H-positive ion to become ammonium, NH4 positive ion. After nitrogen is fixed, some of the NH4 positive is taken up and used by plants. Nitrifying bacteria in the soil also convert some of the NH4 positive to nitrate, NO3 negative, which is more readily absorbed by plants. Plants use the nitrogen they assimilate to synthesize molecules such as amino acids, which are then incorporated into proteins. When a herbivore eats a plant, it digests the proteins it needs. Nitrogen-containing waste products are formed during protein metabolism. Consumers excrete some nitrogens as well as incorporate some in their body tissues. Organisms that are not consumed eventually die and become detritus, which is decomposed by prokaryotes and fungi. Decomposition releases NH4 positive from organic compounds back into the soil, replenishing the soil reservoirs of NH4 positive and, with the help of nitrifying bacteria, NO3 negative. Under low oxygen conditions, however, soil bacteria, known as denitrifiers, strip the oxygen atoms from the NO3 negative, releasing N2 back into the atmosphere and depleting the soil reservoir of usable nitrogen.
Okay, so we continue cycle, biogeochemical cycle. Okay, last one is basically sulfur cycle. So apa important dia sulfur ni? Sulfur is a key component of amino acid kan, which are the building blocks of proteins. So this sulfur containing amino acid, dia akan contribute to the structure and formation of the protein itself lah. Okay, such as enzyme activity and also protein structure untuk plant dan juga animal. Okay. Okay, so let's watch.
Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science and the Sulfur Cycle. All living things require sulfur in order to make protein. Let's take a look at how sulfur cycles itself around the Earth. First, sulfur reserves are found in the lithosphere and are released by weathering. In addition, hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide gas is released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions, hot springs, and the decay of biological material in swamps and bogs. Marine algae produce dimethyl sulfide that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. Sulfur dioxide gas also forms when dimethyl sulfide reacts with oxygen gas. The burning of fossil fuels also releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen in the atmosphere and creates sulfur trioxide. The sulfur trioxide reacts with water in the atmosphere to produce sulfuric acid. Sulfur trioxide also reacts with the ammonia in the atmosphere to produce sulfate salts. The sulfuric acid and sulfate salts fall to the earth by precipitation like rainfall. The soil absorbs this sulfate salts. Plants then absorb the sulfur by absorbing the sulfate salts from the soil. Animals in turn get sulfur by eating the plants, and the animals release sulfur when they decay. As animals decay, they release sulfate salts and hydrogen sulfide. Anaerobic bacteria breaks down the hydrogen sulfide into sulfur gas, and the aerobic bacteria converts the sulfur into sulfate salts, which again the plants absorb. And then, like any other cycle, it just keeps going around and around. So there's the sulfur cycle. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness multiplies kindness. Be kind to somebody today.
Okay, so what forms are available to life untuk sulfur ni? Okay, first sulfates tadi lah. Okay, as you watch on the video. So they are utilized by plants and also microbes from the soil, and they can convert into organic molecules like amino acid and also protein. Okay, while organic sulfur is consumed by animals. Okay, bila dia makan plant. Okay, so sulfur is incorporated, okay, as organic sulfur into the bodies of the animals. Okay, and they basically enter food chain, masuklah dalam food chain. Okay, so certain bacteria can also convert sulfates jadi hydrogen sulfide gas under anaerobic conditions. So which is then further reduced or oxidized in various environmental processes. So you can refer back to the video, okay, on the sulfur cycle too. Okay, so this is just another just another figure nak tunjuk kat you basically where are the sources of sulfur. Okay, so of course kita akan tengok dekat atmosphere, dekat water and also dekat soil. Okay, so let's look at the reservoir for sulfur. So reservoir for sulfur, first kita tengok lithosphere. Lithosphere tu maksudnya land. Okay, so sulfur is stored in rocks and also minerals. Rocks and also minerals, primarily sebagai sulfate ataupun sulfide mineral. Okay, so ini bahan-bahan sulfide ini, okay, will be released masuk dalam soil through weathering processes. Weathering tu contoh macam erosion, okay, okay, rain, water, runoff dan sebagainya. Okay, next one is atmosphere. So sulfur gases such as sulfur dioxide are present in the atmosphere and can be deposited back into the Earth's surface through processes like acid rain. Okay. And in water or hydrosphere, sulfur is present in water bodies, okay, where it can be found in dissolved forms like sulfates. Okay, so it is also involved in marine ecosystem where certain bacteria boleh oxidize hydrogen sulfide, okay, to become sulfur. Okay, let's look at the key process dia tadi. Okay, kita tengok dalam lithosphere tadi kan, dia ada sediment. Okay, so how can the sediment be made available in the cycle? Through weathering lah. Okay, so rock tu weathered kan by natural agent. Contohnya hujan, okay, by erosion, temperature, okay, and then this will release sulfur into the soil. Okay, so dalam figure tadi pun ada tunjuk volcanic emission ataupun volcanic eruption. Volcanoes of course akan emit a lot of sulfur gases, mainly sulfur dioxide lah, into the atmosphere. Okay, what else do we have? Atmospheric deposition, meaning sulfur gases akan react dengan water, jadilah sulfuric acid. So dia akan turun sebagai acid rain. Okay, yang akan deposit sulfur masuk balik ke dalam earth surface dan juga ocean. Okay. So next one is through the process of oxidation and also reduction. So bacteria oxidize hydrogen sulfide, jadilah sulfate, while other bacteria boleh reduce sulfate kepada hydrogen sulfide. Okay, bertukar dari satu bentuk ke sebentuk yang lain lah. Okay, decomposition. Kita pun ada banyak kan kalau if you realise, okay, semua video dalam biogeochemical cycle ni untuk semua nutrien yang kita discuss ada mesti melibatkan decomposition. So terrestrial ecosystem make use of soil sulfates. When organism die, sulfur is released back into the atmosphere as hydrogen sulfide dalam bentuk gas. Okay, so just another figure for sulfur cycle. Okay, what are the impacts of human? Okay, activity on the emission of sulfur. So kita yang paling obvious adalah burning kita punya fossil fuel okay, dan apa saja yang kita bakar lah basically akan release sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay, so of course the increase of sulfur dioxide dekat dalam cloud will also increase the extent of acid rain, okay, on the earth. Okay, satu lagi aktiviti yang agak penting adalah sulfur mining. Memang kita mine sulfur untuk buat baja. Okay, also increase the sulfur content in the cycle. Okay, so ini example sulfur mining dekat Gunung Ijin, East Java, Indonesia. Okay, so done with this. So next, kita nak pergi energy flow in an ecosystem. So look at this figure basically. Kita nak tengok sebagai sun as the source of energy. So this figure is from Campbell, self-explanatory. Kita tengok kita nak kaitkan antara chemical cycling dalam pertukaran bentuk daripada chemical dari bentuk satu bahan ke satu bahan yang lain. Okay. Tapi source dia is basically from the sun. Okay. So tengok gambar tu, plant convert sunlight to chemical energy. Organisms will use this chemical energy to do work. Okay. Dan bila kita decompose, kita pulangkan chemical tu balik. Okay, to the system. Okay. So nota ini self-explanatory. An ecosystem includes all the living organism in satu area dan juga termasuk dia punya factor abiotic yang dia interact. Okay. So dia kata an ecosystem can encompass a large area, boleh jadi forest, boleh jadi tasik, boleh jadi island. Okay. Atau boleh jadi small ecosystem, kita panggil microcosm tu. Okay, such as space under a fallen log or a small desert spring. Okay. So dia macam micro ecosystem yang kecil. Okay, jadi ada their own world. Okay, so dia kata ekosistem dinamik ni akan involve dua proses, energy flow dan juga chemical cycling. Ada tenaga dan ada pertukaran bentuk kimia, chemical process. Okay, energy enters most ecosystem as sunlight, lepas tu kita convert kepada chemical energy by autotroph, lepas tu kita pass lah ke heterotroph. Okay, and as we go along the food chain, okay, they pass down from one heterotroph ke heterotroph, ada energy yang hilang sebagai haba kan, as heat. Okay, dan kita tahu energy cannot be recycled. Okay, dia cuma change kan from one form to another form and then lost into space. Okay, so elements such as carbon and nitrogen akan pass between biotic dengan abiotic component in the ecosystem. Okay, so processes of photosynthetic and also chemosynthetic organism take up inorganic chemical and incorporate them, masuklah dalam organic compound. So macam mana kita pulangkan balik? Through decomposition ataupun breakdown. Dan dia pun baliklah balik to its inorganic form in the soil. Okay, so ini tak ada apa-apa, just a figure to show you basically bacteria yang dan juga fungi that act as decomposers. Okay, so kalau kita tengok figure ni, basically kita tahu basically energy tu selalu akan lost. Okay, energy will be lost. Okay, loss of heat. Ini pun hilang juga. Sini pun hilang juga. So energy is lost from system. So kita kena ada continuous supply of energy. So mana datangnya continuous supply tu? It comes from sunlight. Okay, last part. Food chain and food web. Okay, so ini term-term I think you are familiar. Kita ada producer and also consumers. Pertama kita ada autotroph sebagai producer yang boleh synthesize their own food from inorganic substances. So kebanyakannya adalah photoautotroph, tapi ada juga yang chemoautotroph. Photo basically can produce food through sunlight, while chemoautotroph dia boleh ambil chemical kan daripada soil, okay, daripada rocks dan produce food dia sendiri. Next kita ada consumers or heterotrophs, tak boleh synthesize their own food, so they directly or indirectly dependent dengan autotroph for energy and also nutrient. Okay, so kita ada primary, secondary, okay, and tertiary consumer. Okay, itu dia tolong summarizekan aja. All three. Dan untuk primary consumer, secondary dan tertiary consumer. So you can have a look and read this on your own. Okay, so ini decomposers and detritivores. Okay, detritivores or decomposers are consumers yang akan derive their energy daripada detritus. Detritus maknanya non-living organic matter. Okay, siapakah dia? Dia adalah prokaryote dengan fungi are important detritivores. Decomposition connects all the trophic levels. Kalau kita perasan dalam biogeochemical cycle, mesti ada decomposition. Okay, so food chain adalah hubungan, feeding relationship between organism. Okay, the trophic structure of the community. So food chain ni sebenarnya adalah pathway yang mana food energy is transferred daripada satu trophic level to another trophic level. Kita mesti start dengan producers. Okay, usually kita start pada autotroph, lepas tu kita pergi ke herbivore, carnivore, and then biasanya ujungnya adalah decomposers. Okay, so there are a few types of food chain. Okay, different habitats and ecosystem akan provide many possible food chains that make up a food web. Kan, a combination of several food chains will build a food web. So yang first kita panggil what we call as a grazing food chain. Okay. Grazing tu maknanya animal akan graze atau makan basically autotroph. Okay, so example satu grazing food chain, predator food chain. Predator food chain maknanya kat ujung mesti ada predator. Okay, kalau parasite food chain, ujung dia ada parasite. Example, yang ni Leptomonas. Tengok predator food chain ni kita ada grass, grasshopper, bird dengan hawk. So hujung dia ada predator. Kalau parasitic food chain, grass, rabbit, kutu, on top of kutu tu ada hama, Leptomonas. Okay, what else do we have? Detritus food chain. Okay, sebagai contoh leaf litter, daun-daun yang mati kat dalam hutan. Okay, yang ada pada permukaan tanah. Okay, dalam tu kawasan tu ada cacing. Cacing boleh dimakan oleh birds, and then birds makan by sparrowhawk. Okay, so dead animals. So kalau you tengok detritus ni, dia start daripada non-living organisms kan. Okay, dia tak start daripada autotrophs, producers. So dead animals, blowfly larvae, frog, and then snake. Okay, so it begins with dead organic matter ataupun decayed organic matter, and then eaten by detritivores, and then eaten by predators or carnivores. Okay, so ini detritus food chain.
If someone called you scum, you'd probably be offended. But scientifically, they might not be far off. Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? You might say it comes from plants, animals, or even fungi, but you'd probably rather not think about the rotting organisms and poop that feed those plants, animals, and fungi. So really, you and most of the matter in your body are just 2 or 3 degrees of separation from things like pond scum. All species in an ecosystem, from the creatures in a coral reef, to the fish in a lake, to the lions on the savanna, are directly or indirectly nourished by dead stuff. Most of the organic matter in our bodies, if we trace it back far enough, comes from CO2 and water through photosynthesis. Plants use the energy from sunlight to transform carbon dioxide and water from the environment into glucose and oxygen. That glucose is then transformed into more complex organic molecules to form leaves, stems, roots, fruit, and so on. The energy stored in these organic molecules supports the food chains with which we're familiar. You've probably seen illustrations like this, or this. These green food chains start with living plants at their base. But in real-life terrestrial ecosystems, less than 10% of plant matter is eaten while it's still alive. What about the other 90? Well, just look at the ground on an autumn day. Living plants shed dead body parts, fallen leaves, broken branches, and even underground roots. Many plants are lucky enough to go their whole lives without being eaten, eventually dying and leaving remains. All of these uneaten, undigested, and dead plant parts, that 90% of terrestrial plant matter, that becomes detritus, the base of what we call the brown food chain, which looks more like this. What happens to plants also happens to all other organisms up the food chain. Some are eaten alive, but most are eaten only when they're dead and rotting. And all along this food chain, living things shed organic matter and expel digestive waste before dying and leaving their remains to decay. All that death sounds grim, right? But it's not. All detritus is ultimately consumed by microbes and other scavengers, so it actually forms the base of the brown food chain that supports many other organisms, including us. Scientists are learning that this detritus is an unexpectedly huge energy source, fueling most natural ecosystems. But the interactions within an ecosystem are even more complex than that. What a food chain really represents is a single pathway of energy flow. And within any ecosystem, many of these flows are linked together to form a rich network of interactions, or food web, with dead matter supporting that network at every step. The resulting food web is so connected that almost every species is no more than 2 degrees from detritus, even us humans. You probably don't eat rotting things, poop, or pond scum directly, but your food sources probably do. Many animals we eat either feed directly on detritus themselves, like pork, poultry, mushrooms, shellfish, or catfish and other bottom feeders, or they're fed animal byproducts. So if you're thinking that nature is full of waste, you're right. But one organism's garbage is another's gold, and all that rotting dead stuff ultimately provides the energy that nourishes us and most of life on Earth as it passes through the food web. Now that's some food for thought.
Okay, so next, food chain. Kita ada aquatic food chain. Okay, so example sebagai marine. Okay, ada juga dalam lake and also river. Okay, so ada terrestrial, ada yang marine. Okay, so kita summarize from this figure dah. So whatever it is, biasanya bawah we'll start with primary producer, lepas tu consumers lah. Primary, secondary, tertiary dengan quaternary. Okay, food web. Okay, as the video explained, a food web is a food chain is not an isolated unit. Dia kata separate from other feeding relationships in a community. A group of food chain that are linked together jadilah food web. Okay, dalam food web, an organism can occupy more than one trophic level. So ini soalan exam yang selalu ditanya. Dia kata which organisms occupies more than 2 trophic level. So you need to identify the organism dalam food web yang dia bagi.
So we've learned that a food chain is a simple way to illustrate the flow of energy and matter through an ecosystem. I think we've got that covered. But we also know that an ecosystem is an incredibly complex community full of many different organisms that interact in many different ways. To illustrate the complexity of those feeding relationships, a simple food chain just won't cut it. That's where a food web comes in handy. Basically, a food web is made up of many different intersecting food chains.
Let's start with a food chain we made in our first video. We'll use arrows to show what is eaten by what. First is our producer, periphyton, which is nibbled on by the mosquito larva, which is munched on by the gambusia, which is chowed upon by the great blue heron, which is devoured by the alligator. Simple enough. But then there's the sailfin molly. It eats periphyton too, as well as mosquito larvae. The molly also eats little bits of dead sawgrass. The great blue heron would scarf down a sailfin molly if it could. So would an anhinga. So would a raccoon. The raccoon would also enjoy a baby anhinga, as would the alligator. The alligator wouldn't pass up a raccoon either. But a white-tailed deer munching on sawgrass would be an ideal meal for the gator. Or a rare Florida panther.
So now we're starting to understand how complex and interconnected everything is. And there's still thousands of Everglades plants and animals that we haven't included in our food web. Some of these animals can be quite picky, like the limpkin, which feeds almost entirely on freshwater apple snails. This of course makes the limpkin a secondary consumer, or a carnivore, while the apple snail is a primary consumer, or herbivore, because it browses on aquatic plants. The purple gallinule, on the other hand, is less picky. It might pick apart the fruit of a spatterdock plant to feast on its seeds, or score a bit of protein from a baby red-bellied turtle. Since the purple gallinule eats both animals and plants, we call it an omnivore. So that's just one little part of the Everglades food web. The food web helps us to understand that in an ecosystem, all plants and animals rely on each other somehow for survival. It's an intricate and important network of life. But what would happen if we remove something from the food web? Let's say an apple snail or a sailfin molly. I'll let you try to figure that one out.
Okay, so have a look at this figure and cuba tengok, okay, kat mana hawk tu yang occupies level, trophic level 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so a little bit of exercise. Okay, so there's given here ada marine punya food web. Dia kata for each organism in this food web, indicate the number of other kinds of organism that it eats. And then number 2, mana satu organism, which organisms, 2 organism, ada 2, are both predator and prey for each other. Okay, so you can check from the arrow. So that's an exercise for you. Okay, so in conclusion, okay, food chain ni kalau you realize dia ada food length dia limited. Okay, so most food chains dia ada 5 or fewer links. Okay, so kenapa begitu? Dia tak boleh terlalu panjang, tak boleh sampai 7, 8 dia punya food chain. So this is due to inefficiency energy transfer along the chain. Okay, dia kata only 10% of the energy stored daripada organic matter dekat setiap trophic level. Maknanya daripada producer pergi ke consumer, 10% sahaja is converted to organic matter at the next trophic level. So maknanya 90% yang hilang. Okay. So what is that? That one kita akan discuss, okay, later on next week. Okay. So another factor limiting food chain length is that carnivores tend to be larger at higher trophic level. So bila large carnivores ni, dia cannot obtain makanan yang cukup from their small prey in a given time untuk meet dia punya metabolic needs. Okay, so we stop until there. So kita akan continue untuk pyramid of number, biomass dengan production energy, and also kita nak explain GPP and also NPP. Alright.
Every day in nature, energy is being transferred. Energy from the sun is transferred to these plants. And then insects may receive energy from the plants. And then a snake may receive energy from an insect. An energy pyramid is a display of energy flow in a community. The different levels represent different groups of organisms and where they receive energy. Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science and Energy Pyramids. Let's take a look at an energy pyramid in a typical ecosystem. You will find producers at the bottom of the energy pyramid. Examples of producers are plants. Plants are autotrophs because they use sunlight and photosynthesis in order to produce glucose, which can be converted to energy. They do not rely on other organisms for energy. Plants take sunlight plus carbon dioxide and water to produce glucose and oxygen. Plants make up the base of an energy pyramid. The next layer includes primary consumers. These organisms are herbivores because they eat producers or plants. Examples are insects, cows, horses, and any other organisms that live exclusively on plants. The next level includes your secondary consumers, which include carnivores or omnivores. Carnivores consume primary consumers, and omnivores eat producers and primary consumers. Examples include frogs, lizards, many snakes, and many birds. Above the secondary consumers are tertiary consumers. Tertiary means third level. They consume secondary consumers. This level includes carnivores. Examples would include wolves, lions, and this hawk. Each layer of the energy pyramid is called a trophic level, and as you move up each trophic level, 90% of the energy is lost, much of this to heat, and only 10% is transferred to each layer above it. If you'd like to know more about energy pyramids, this playlist will help, and as always, Moo Moo Math uploads a new math or science video every day. Please subscribe and share.
Did you know that living organisms interact with each other and with non-living things in an ecosystem? An ecosystem is made up of both living and non-living things, or what biologists refer to as biotic and abiotic factors. Some examples of living things, or biotic factors, include polar bears, penguins, wolves, foxes, and mosses. Some examples of abiotic factors include rocks, soil, snow, air, temperature, and water. Living organisms interact with other living organisms in an ecosystem. For example, a caterpillar might interact with a leaf or another insect in its environment. A fox might interact with a plant or another animal in its environment. Living things also interact with non-living things in their environment. For example, organisms interact with water, sunlight, air, soil, and rocks. The interaction and dependence that exists between living and non-living things are what make up an ecosystem.
But plants on the forest floor need not be passive. If the light won't come to them, they can go to the light. But they still have a problem. The light is 50 meters above them, so they must climb. It's much easier to use another plant as scaffolding. But they won't get very high unless they can hold on tight. Like fingertips searching for a hold, this ivy's adhesive pads grip the bark. Instead of sticking to the trees, some climbers use sharp claws. The cat's claw creeper hooks its tendrils into the tiniest crevices and hauls itself to the top. With every meter it climbs, the light gets a little stronger, fueling more growth. This tendril of a passion flower seems to flail aimlessly in midair, but in fact it's searching for an anchor point. Its tendril coils on itself, pulling the plant towards its support. In a matter of just days, these climbers make it to the canopy. Now, with light in plentiful supply, these plants are able to flower.
Shrouded in a blanket of clouds, they awaken. Their canopies of green glitter in the sun. Their wildlife start to slither, chirp, and growl. And one of the planet's richest ecosystems comes to life. Rainforests are the oldest living ecosystems on the planet. Some can trace their origins to over 70 million years ago, back to a time when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. While the giant reptiles have disappeared, rainforests continue to thrive, growing on every continent except Antarctica. Two types of rainforests are scattered across the globe: temperate and tropical. Temperate rainforests are mainly found in the mid-latitudes, often near cooler, coastal, mountainous regions. Tropical rainforests are primarily located in warmer climates between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. As their names imply, temperate and tropical rainforests are the wettest forests on Earth, receiving up to about 33 feet of rain per year. This precipitation plays a critical role in creating an exceptionally lush and biologically diverse habitat. While rainforests only make up about 6% of the Earth's surface area, they are home to over half of the world's plant and animal species. This biodiversity creates benefits that extend far beyond the rainforest boundaries. Rainforest plants produce an assortment of food items, in addition to ingredients useful in everyday products and medicines. In fact, an estimated 70% of the plants used in cancer treatments are only found in rainforests. On an even larger scale, rainforests help to stabilize the planet's climate. Its lush green vegetation regulate global temperatures by absorbing massive amounts of radiation from the sun. They also absorb vast amounts of carbon dioxide and convert them into oxygen, about 40% of the planet's breathable air. Over the past few centuries, rainforests have disappeared at an alarming rate. Factors such as economic inequalities, human development, and demand for natural resources have fueled the deforestation of these rich ecosystems. At the current rate, rainforests, which have survived for over 70 million years, may completely disappear within the next century. But through educational campaigns, sustainable logging practices, and cooperation with local communities, deforestation may begin to slow down, helping preserve rainforests for many generations to come.